Did you know that the origins of modern propaganda lay with the Catholic Church? Yes, that's right. It all began in 1622 with Pope Gregory XV in the Vatican deciding to create an organization called Propaganda Fide. The purpose of this organization was to spread propaganda worldwide to promote Christian, more specifically Catholic beliefs to people that had not yet been exposed to them. Now, we know that this has been a success because nowadays we have Catholic Church, branches of the Catholic Church pretty much worldwide, so obviously that worked. But that was the first time in history that the word propaganda was actively used this way. Let's take a deeper look at Propaganda Fide. We can find some information online. There's this website here called Agência Fides. I'm going to leave the link in the description of this video. But we're going to focus most of the information from academic journals, as this combined to primary sources are the major sources that I'm going to be using in this channel. So for this we have two scientific journals. The first one is from the Catholic Historical Review, the Sacred Congregation, the Propaganda Fide, and the second one we have also from the records of the American Catholic Historical Society of Philadelphia. Both of them, I'm going to make them available on my Patreon. You can download them for free. The link is at the description as well. So back to here. As we know, Propaganda Fide was originally created on the 22nd of June in 1622 by Pope Gregory XV, that published the bull in which, starting from the salvation of the world operated by God through the sacrifice of his only Son, Jesus Christ, he affirmed that it was a duty that we place in our means all our efforts to bring souls to Christ. So right from the get-go, we know that, according to them, the main goal of Propaganda Fide was to do just this, is to bring souls to Christ. Now let's take a look at what these sources tell us. But one thing I want to make very clear is that it is incredibly hard to find good sources about this topic, mainly because the church didn't want this to be published for the mainstream public. This first journal I have here, the Sacred Congregation, the Propaganda Fide, is looking at the history between 1622 and 1922. You struggle to find things that are much more modern than that. I highlighted a few bits here. Obviously, first things first, this was mainly created as a counter-reformation strategy. We see now that there are two main goals was to spread the message of the Catholic Church and to counter reform against the Protestant Church. So to counter the Reformation of the time, that was already establishing its own colleges, the Catholic Church created this, as well as the Company of Jesus by St. Ignatius, which received official approval on September 1540, and the unparalleled missionary success of the Jesuits and the old religious orders from that time down to the establishment of Propaganda Fide gave to the founders of the Sacred Congregation a trained body of workers, a field in which fresh discoveries were being constantly made, and a plan of action which had stood the test of almost a century. So why are we talking about Propaganda Fide? Because this is a foundation of propaganda as we know today. This is the first point in history where we have an organized body of people that is employing skilled workers to spread a directed and agreeable message between all the people involved towards subjects that have never heard this before. So truly, in the history of propaganda, this is revolutionary. The creation of the congregation, the Propaganda Fide, by the bull that we discussed there, in June 22nd, 1622, may be accepted as the completion of the formative stage of the Counter-reformation. It was the last of the greater congregations to be established by the Holy See, and it soon outshone all the others by the extraordinary extent of its powers and its jurisdiction. So the object of the congregation, the Propaganda Fide, was definitely understood. It was to regain the faithful in all those parts of the world where Protestantism had been established and to bring the light of the true faith to hidden lands. So again here we see to reconquer by spiritual arms, by prayers and good works, as they say, as well as preaching and catechizing the countries that have been lost to the Protestants, but also the diffusion of the gospel in pagan lands. This work lasted for 3 centuries, as you can see here. So we have a little bit more of the history. I'm not going to bore you with none of that. You can read for yourself on this paper. But for 280 years, so until 1908, propaganda was the Supreme Court of Administration and Appeal under the Holy Father for the Church in this country. So We're talking about an organization that had a lot of power, and they had physical buildings too. This is a very powerful organization. And they say here, no other department of the church do we own so much into the phenomenal progress of the faith in the United States as to Propaganda Fide. So the United States was one of the countries where this has been the most successful. Here we have, there's a list, right, of cardinals that were involved with the literature on the missions in general and on the missions conducted by the religious orders, all of which were part of the jurisdiction of the Propaganda Fide, is one of the richest we possess. Wow. This source material must be studied by anyone who desires to write a complete or partial history of propaganda, which is why we're talking about here right now. But it's interesting that even though this was so massive in the history of propaganda, no official history, or otherwise, of the congregation has yet been published. Interesting, isn't it? Then we come to the end of this journal. Now let's look at the second one that gives us a little bit more information, is longer, and was published shortly after, so December 1930. This comes from the records of the American Catholic Historical Society. The history of the Sacred Congregation of Propaganda Fide is vitally important to the American Catholic Church. With but few exceptions, and those negligible, this history has not yet been written. That is a massive problem to me as a historian, right? That even though we had all these archives, for 300 years this organization was extensive and went to all countries you can imagine. Why do we not have a written record of exactly what was done, what work was spread, how many people reached? We don't have a record of this. Various explanations have been given for the rise of the Sacred Congregation, the Propaganda Fide. Its origins, as we see here, have been tracked. Some people say even before 1622. It has been considered by some as another step in the reorganization of the church that happened in 1588, so the history could have begun a little bit earlier than that. And also talks here about the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, and propaganda may well be said to be the result of a slow evolution of many different factors in the life of the church. Now, in their defense, as they claim, during the time of the 16th century, Protestant revolt was going at full blast, and they needed to do something about it. So 13 cardinals were the first members chosen by Pope Gregory, and here this creation of this is a document of the greatest importance in the history of the propaganda. And here they claim, right, so this is in the original document, one of their principal duties was to lead the wandering sheep to the fold of Christ. Obviously, we're aware of atrocities that were done by the church in this time, but this video is not about that. I'm just reading to you what the official narrative claims was the main goal of Propaganda Fide. And to be fair, they were very successful in this. And it's worth noting, this is not just about religion, but as we see here, the Protestant revolt was causing political disalliances in Europe, because at the time we had a lot of power in the hands of Catholics, kings and queens. So in Europe this was a problem. So there was also a political motive behind trying to fight off this Protestant movement. And worth noting that the Catholic Church granted the members of Propaganda Fide full and free and ample authority and power to transact and execute all businesses necessary or expedient for the good of the missions. We're talking about cardinals, priests, bishops that had a lot of power in their hands. They had a lot of resources, because we all know the Catholic Church has always been very wealthy, and they had a lot of knowledge because the church employed the wisest and most skilled men to do these voyages, to do these missions worldwide. So this was gigantic, to be honest, and we can see now why. If you travel to many countries in the world, primarily Latin America, south of Europe, parts of Asia, United States, you're gonna see so much of the Catholic Church ingrained in the culture. It's insane, and this, to my understanding, can all be attributed to the success of Propaganda Fide. Once a month, a general congregation was held at the Palace of Propaganda, so here you can see the photograph on the video, with all the cardinals and secretaries present, so they did meet quite often. And it's worth noting because the Pope Urban VIII recognized that they needed to train more workers. So he had seen the success of the other Roman seminaries established since the Council of Trent, and therefore he determined to form a seminary to educate men to work in the territory under propaganda. Again, this had never been done before. On August 1st, 1627, he issued another bull, which erected the Collegium Urbanum. So this was a college just to teach people, members of the church, how to carry on this propaganda. In the college, young men born in missionary countries were received and instructed and then sent back to their native land to be faithful missionaries for the preservation and propagation of the faith. So here we see subversion. Haha, very interesting. So not only were they training local men that were linked to the church, but they were taking young men born in missionary countries. So you have to imagine, you're in Spain, it's the 1600s, Spain or Portugal or Italy, and instead of having another fellow Spaniard or Italian, whatever, being trained with you, they're bringing someone from a colony in Latin America, and they're giving that man a training in Europe, which at the time, when you compare the education available in Europe with what was available in Latin America, sharp contrast. So they've done it in a subversive way, and you have them sent back to their native land to be faithful missionaries. Very, very ingenious. We see that throughout the history of propaganda, this was done again later on, and when I come out with my PhD studies, I'll be talking more about this. But I'll give it to the Catholic Church. They done something that was truly revolutionary in the field of propaganda. Propaganda tried to win the Catholic kings as supporters and to allay the suspicions of the non-Catholics, so also the political thing. I will be talking more about kings and queens of Europe in that time period in the future as well, so we're going to link several pieces of information. If propaganda was to accomplish its purpose, it must obtain trustworthy and accurate knowledge about the missions and the colonies where missions were to be established. Why did I highlight this? Because this exact same strategy was done later on by the British, as we are going to look into details with some governmental documents that I have obtained through my PhD. But back to the Catholic Church. One major problem they had at the time is that there were no cables, telegraphy, railroads, or steamships, no automobiles, or good roads. Long travel was a real hardship, and communication with distant land was, to say the least, very insecure and slow. So consequently, much of the information that reached Propaganda Fide was not reliable. Why is this important? Because how do we know that everything that was done at the time by Propaganda Fide and by the Catholic Church was 100% correct? We can't know, because communication was not reliable. So there is a likelihood that a lot of dodgy stuff was done, and no one talks about it because no written history was done about this yet. The cardinals were misled in some cases and did make mistakes, but the wonder of it all is that more errors did not occur under such handicaps. We don't know. To write a complete account of the Sacred Congregation's success in Europe, Asia and Africa, and above all in America, would fill volumes. That is the end of it. As you can see, there's not much information available at all, but I will leave these PDFs available for download for free on my Patreon. The link is there below. Now, I hope you enjoyed this video, and please leave in the comments below your opinion, what you thought about this, and if you had ever heard about this before. And don't forget to subscribe if you wish to hear more topics about propaganda, as I have tons of videos coming in the near future. Thank you very much and have a great day.